Hey everybody, Dustin DePierre here, columnist Jeremy Price. We're doing a pregame scoop talk. We feel it's appropriate. Tomorrow's game is going to be the first matchup between two top 10 teams since 2000. Believe it or not, which is strange to look at it that way, just considering all the big games that occurred in the last year or so. At no point was Indiana a top 10 team at the same time they were playing another top 10 team last year. The Michigan State game, the Ohio State game, Kentucky game, they hadn't breached the top 10 at that point, and they would later fall out of it. So this is a big one, basically, and a lot of people weren't expecting it, but I think pretty much the consensus today, we had availability today to talk to the guys, and I think pretty much everybody looks at it that way. Minnesota is a really, really good team.
Yeah, it's not the team you expected would be the team that IU would play in the first top 10 game in 13 years, but they've done nothing to not deserve that title, that respect, that whatever you want to call it. They certainly have appeared every bit of legitimate this year. I mean, you consider their only losses to Duke on a neutral court and the Battle for Atlantis tournament. So
right, yeah, and they've stepped to it pretty quick. I mean, as you know, they've got without question the best, I guess, Big Ten resume so far. I mean, everybody's just starting to get to playing people. I mean, Minnesota had a pretty tough opening. I mean, they had Michigan State at home, and they've also had Illinois on the road. So those are two big games, and they came out with significant wins in that. I think they've got double-digit victories in both of those games, if I'm not mistaken, or close to it. But again, obviously they won a couple pretty impressive games in the non-conference. Again, Duke was their only loss. They beat Stanford, they beat Memphis, they beat Southern California, they beat some other teams that are pretty impressive. And they've really done it with bigger than anything else, more than anything else. They've done it on the glass. They are the best offensive rebounding team in the country. They average they grab 48.5% of their missed shots. That's a gargantuan number. That is a huge, huge, huge number. They get almost as many offensive rebounds as the opposing team gets defensive rebounds, and that's rare. I mean, you really got to dominate the glass to do that.
Yeah, and that's kind of consistent with actually what happened last year at Assembly Hall. I believe Minnesota had 16 offensive rebounds out of their, I think it was like 33 total for the game. So that's right at that 45-50% mark of offensive rebounding. And after we saw Indiana struggle a little bit with the Penn State offensive rebounding in its last game, that's something that definitely has to be a concern for the Hoosiers tomorrow. If they're going to give up those kind of numbers on the offensive glass, they're probably in trouble.
Definitely. And it's an interesting matchup that way as far as the glass is concerned. It's interesting that really that Minnesota's as good as they are because they don't have a huge front. But, they actually play Trevor Mbakwe at the 5, and he's obviously a, really pure power forward at 6'8", 245. But he's that big. He's that, muscular of a guy, that aggressive of a guy that he could still throw people around even though he's given up a couple inches. Of course, he also has huge amount of length, gigantic wingspan. So Cody Zeller is going to have his hands full, even though he's going to have a 4-inch advantage in just straight up height. And Mbakwe is going to be able to make up for that in length and all, sort of arm length, and also make up for that a little bit, more than anything else in just size and just bulk and just ability to sort of throw people around. Zeller's gotten bigger. We've talked about sort of his weight gains and strength gains since he was in high school. But Mbakwe's a man. I mean that guy he started at college in 2007. Think about that. 2007 is when he got to college. So that's a man without question. He plays that way. He's coming off the ACL tear last year, and obviously not quite 100% yet. Still averaging 20.1 minutes a game, but he's averaging 7.9 rebounds in that time. I mean, the only guy who's averaging more rebounds in the Big Ten is Ryan Evans, and he plays 9 more minutes a game. And Mbakwe is just playing that hard. And Rodney Williams is their 4 guy. He's got a 3-man's body. He's 6'7", 200, but he can just jump over guys. Rodney Williams is one of the best leapers in the league. But after that, it was they got really good guard rebounding. Austin Hollins and Joe Coleman are their 2 and 3, and they both average over 3 rebounds a game. Then you go on the bench, and they've got 2 6'10 guys, 6'10", 6'11 guys, Elliot Eliasson and Maurice Walker, who have center size. Also Otto Osinix, I have no idea how you pronounce that, but they've got a lot of size coming off the bench. So even if they didn't have that huge last year and previous years and recent years, they'd had a just bigger straight starting front line, guys like Ralph Sampson and Colton Iverson, and some 7', 6'11 guys that would win the battle on the glass that way and just oversize you. These guys, they have a little bit of a smaller height, front line in terms of just strength, straight height, but they've got athleticism, physicality, and then they've got a deep bench of guys that can rebound.
Yeah, they do. And interesting because they didn't really have to use some of those big guys off the bench against Illinois the other night.
Right.
Because Illinois doesn't have a lot of size, plays a lot of 4 out, 1 in kind of situations.
And they take advantage
the
of
guys
this.
like Walker and Eliason didn't really see much of the court the other night. But as you mentioned, I mean, just the guard rebounding is what really does the job for Minnesota. They don't just have to rely on their 4 or 5 guys to get rebounds. They've got 1, 2, and 3 guys that can go get rebounds, and that's huge.
Yeah, no, and they crash 5 on defense, and obviously there's some strategic issues there too. I mean, it's harder if you're going to crash. It's harder to get going in transition, But they're still a pretty good transition team. They obviously got out and got a bunch of open dunks against Illinois last week, and yeah, they've got guard rebounding. They've also got guards now that can score. I mean, that's a big thing too. Is as much as gets talked about the rebounding, this backcourt is way better. I mean, they had some major issues last year in terms of injuries. They had a hard time even establishing really a backcourt. And Austin and Andre Hollins, who are not related somehow, despite the fact they both grew up in Tennessee and ended up going to Minnesota, bizarrely. And Joe Coleman, beyond just the rebounding end of it, have just played extremely well, just as just in the backcourt so far.
Yeah, and they've gotten different guys, different games. I mean, Dre Hollins had 41 in a game earlier this year. Just last week, Austin Hollins hit like 6 threes against Northwestern, I think it was.
Yeah, Joe Coleman had 29 against Illinois. Yeah.
I mean, it's a different guy every night, but there's somebody that's providing something on the perimeter scoring-wise to go with the big guys they've got.
Right.
And that balance is really benefiting them. And they just seem, to me, they look more poised, they look more confident, they look more comfortable as a team this year. And
it's amazing the difference, honestly, yeah.
Half court, full court transition. I mean, they're comfortable any style of play you put them in. Really, it seems like, which is huge.
And a big part. I mean, there's 2 big parts. I mean, it's Mbakwe being back is huge, but I mean, Andre Hollins again. It's really once he sort of took over the team last year is when you really and that was late. I mean, that was like late February, and that team ended up in the NIT final. And the biggest reason why I thought if you look at the numbers is really Andre Hollins, and he's a guy that just his confidence level has been huge for those guys. They're a different team. Since he really took over, I mean, they just really didn't seem to have, because of a lot of injuries, because of a lot of shakeups, they didn't really seem to have a great direction last year, and up until they got to the Big Ten tournament and then the NIT, and they have one now. I mean, that's sort of the biggest difference. Kind of switching gears a little bit, I guess. Considering everything we've already said, what does Indiana have to do to get by? Obviously, we mentioned blocking out, is sort of the biggest thing, but how do they do this? How do they beat a team like this Minnesota team?
Well, I think the big key for Indiana is, can the defense continue to sustain at the level that it has through the first 2 Big Ten games? Through these first 2 Big Ten games, they're a top 3 team in scoring defense. They're top of the league in field goal percentage and 3-point field goal percentage defense. That's going to have to, maybe not to that level, but they're going to have to sustain somewhere near that level of defense to have success in a game like this. And another thing, I was looking at today at the box score from last year's game. Christian Watford, 4 points, 3 rebounds, I think, in that game.
That's not an option.
That can't happen.
No, not at all. No, that's. I mean, what happens with Watford is interesting to me. He's got to defend well, because there's a good chance I think he draws Rodney Williams. I mean, I think you probably coming out to start, you have to put Zeller on Mbakwe, obviously, and you have to hope that equalizes in some way, shape, or form. And you have to use your 3 guards on Minnesota's 3 guards. I mean, I don't know that you can bump Watford up to take on a Coleman or an Austin Hollins or something like that. So he's got to deal with a really athletic guy in Rodney Williams. I mean, he's got a little bit more size than Williams does, and he can be a bit of a matchup problem for Rodney on the opposite end. But he's got to be able to defend him, and Williams can get by people and dunk over people, and so Watford's going to have to be able to defend and block out. A lot of times Williams could just beat you by just offensive boards, just getting to the glass and getting putbacks. Watford's got to do that very, very well. I don't know that there's. I mean, you can put Oladipo on him maybe, but do you like the idea of Watford on Coleman or something like that? I don't know that I do.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want to go that direction. And I think Watford can defend Williams at the offensive end. I mean, it's as much keeping him off the glass as anything.
Yeah.
I mean, Rodney Williams is a guy who likes to get his points in transition off the offensive glass. Alley oops, things like that. He's not a guy that typically is going to do a lot of creating for himself. A ton of half
court stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a matchup that will work for Christian Watford, and then offensively he's got to keep Williams occupied on defense, and if that means trying to take him down in the post or
they might be better off bringing him out.
Maybe they
might be better off just bringing him out.
Right.
I think. I mean, he's second on the team in blocks. I think he's got 22. The best option might be just keep him out of the paint.
But I think the other guys that will be critical in this game is Remy Abel and Will Sheehy coming off the Indiana
Will
bench.
Sheehy especially.
Those two guys, size-wise, athletic-wise, probably are a better matchup with some of Minnesota's perimeter players. And, just as we already talked about the defense, I think those two guys can play a critical role defensively to keep some of those Minnesota guys from getting going and also helping out on the glass.
Right. And you're going to have to see something from Elston and Perea in this game. I mean, that's one thing they haven't been able to really rely on yet, is one of those two guys to really step up off the bench. With what Minnesota's got coming off the bench, those guys are going to have to give them something. I mean, they're going to have to go up against 6'11s and 6'9s. And 6'8s, 6'10s. So those guys are going to have to show up. There's going to be critical occasions where they're going to need a block out from Elston or a block out of Perea to make a difference. So those guys are going to matter.
And the other part is that, as you saw with Illinois the other night, Minnesota got them to just settling for that three-point shot and really turned them into a completely perimeter-oriented team. And Indiana can't fall into that trap.
No,
they've got to get things going to the basket, in the post, in the paint, and not just settle for jump shots all day.
Yep. A lot's going to be required from this one. You're going to find out a lot about Indiana tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.